We've all seen the glory of Viking conquest, the burning halls, the raised banners, the roaring feasts. Movies and legends show us the gold piled high and the warriors drenched in victory. But few ever ask what came after the fires died down. What happened to the queens and noblewomen whose kingdoms had just fallen? When the raiders sailed away and the smoke faded, what became of those who once ruled from carved thrones and silk-lined chambers? Their fate wasn't mercy, it was method. The Vikings didn't just take gold and silver, they took people, and among them the highest prizes were women of royal blood. A queen could be a hostage, a tool for ransom, or a symbol of conquest. Her capture wasn't an accident of war, it was strategy. These women carried the bloodlines of power, the keys to alliances, and sometimes the future heirs of kingdoms. To control them was to control history itself. If these queens and noble daughters hadn't been captured, the balance of power across medieval Europe might have looked very different. Whole dynasties rose and fell because of marriages and births that began in captivity. But if they were taken, their lives became currency in a brutal market, a world where worth was measured in silver and survival meant obedience. Some were forced into concubinage, their children born into two worlds, neither slave nor free, yet never royal again. Others were used to seal uneasy truces, traded like treasure between kings and jarls. These women's stories are more than tales of loss. They reveal how the Viking world built its strength not only through steel and fire, but through human trade, through the quiet, devastating subjugation of those who once wore crowns. Each captured queen was a thread woven into the fabric of new empires. Some gave birth to powerful rulers who would later shape nations. Others vanished into the fog of history, their names erased, their graves unknown. This is the part of the Viking saga that was never meant to be told. The story of royal women whose power was stripped away, but whose bloodline still shaped the north. Their fate was the hidden cost of conquest, the unspoken aftermath of victory. And their silence is the loudest reminder of all. In the age of Vikings, no crown was safe once the longships appeared on the horizon. The year was 821, and the Irish coast was alive with smoke and screams. The Vikings had come again, their longships gliding silently through the morning mist before striking with brutal speed. Villages burned, and the sound of steel and terror echoed across the shores. But this was not random chaos. The raid on the settlement of Ulster, now known as Howth, was a calculated strike. The annals of Ulster recorded it with chilling brevity. Ulster was plundered by the heathens, and they carried off a great number of women into captivity. Behind those few words was a world of suffering. These women were not taken by chance. They were chosen. The daughters of Irish kings, noblewomen, and the wives of chieftains were prized above all. They carried prestige, knowledge, and skills that made them valuable in a world that traded in more than gold. In the Viking Age, people themselves were a form of currency. These captured queens and noblewomen were stripped of their names, titles, and status. Under Norse law, they were reclassified as thralls, the lowest social class, property to be bought and sold. Their lives became numbers on a ledger. The long voyage across the sea was the first test. Packed tightly on the decks of ships, exposed to the cold winds and salt spray, only the strongest survived the journey to Dublin, what would become Dublin, the heart of the Viking slave trade in the west. There, under watchful eyes, the captives were sorted and priced. A healthy young woman could be sold for 12 to 20 ounces of silver, the same as a year's income from a small farm. For the traders, this was business. For the captives, it was the end of their world. Some were sold to Norse settlers in Ireland, forced into servitude in new households built on the ruins of their own. Others were shipped farther north to markets in Denmark or Sweden, or even down the great river routes that led to the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. Their skills in weaving, healing, or song once marked them as noble. Now, those same talents increased their price. They became possessions. Their beauty, their labor, even their silence turned into profit. The chronicles never recorded their names. Not one survived in the written word. They were erased from history, their voices lost beneath the waves that carried them away. The Irish queens of 821 were not remembered as individuals, only as entries in a book of raids and silver. Their worth was measured not by birth or courage, but by weight, their value calculated in ounces of silver. Her name was Melkorka, though for years no one knew it. Around the middle of the 10th century, a Viking raid struck the western coast of Ireland. Among the captives taken that day was a young woman of royal blood, the daughter of Muirchertach, an Irish king. She was dragged from her home, her family slaughtered or scattered, and shipped across the cold seas. In a world ruled by power and trade, her lineage meant nothing. She was sold in Norway like fine cloth, bought and priced as property. The buyer was a man named Hoskuld, a wealthy chieftain from Iceland. He was on a trading voyage when he first saw her, standing silent among the slaves, her bearing too proud for her surroundings. He asked for her name, but the merchant claimed she did not speak. She was mute, he said, a broken thing. Hoskuld bought her for 3 marks of silver, a fortune, and took her home to Iceland. There in his hall, she lived as his concubine. For years, Melkorka said nothing. She worked, served, and bore him a son. To everyone in the household, she was simply the quiet thrall, the woman who never spoke. But her silence was not weakness. It was armor. It was her last act of control in a world that had stolen everything else. By refusing to speak, she kept a part of herself untouched, hidden behind a wall of calm. The Icelanders thought her simple. They were wrong. One morning, Hoskuld walked by the river that ran near his farm and heard something strange, the soft sound of a woman's voice. It was Melkorka speaking in Gaelic to her little boy. She was teaching him words from her homeland, passing down the only legacy she had left. Hoskuld realized then that she was not a mute servant, but a noblewoman. When he confronted her, the truth came out. She was a king's daughter, stolen and sold far from her home. Her life changed, but only slightly. Hoskuld treated her with more respect, yet she was never freed. She remained in Iceland, far from the green hills of her youth. Her son Olaf grew to manhood and became a powerful chieftain known for his wealth and fine dress, Olaf the Peacock. He later sailed to Ireland and met his grandfather, the king, who welcomed him as kin. But Melkorka herself never returned. She died in exile, her true name known at last, but her freedom forever lost, bought, hidden, revealed. That was her story. A queen's daughter turned captive, a mother who built a legacy from silence. Her bloodline lived on in Icelandic sagas, but her heart was buried far from the land she once called home. In the autumn of 870, the great heathen army swept across the north like a storm. For 5 long years, they had burned towns and churches across England, and now their banners turned toward the coast of Northumbria. Their leaders were feared across Europe: Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok. Their next target was a lonely monastery at Coldingham, perched high on a cliff above the cold North Sea. It was a place of prayer, home to monks and nuns who lived apart from the world. But the world was coming for them. The abbess of the monastery, a woman named Ebba the Younger, knew exactly what the Vikings did to those they captured. She had heard the stories of churches looted, priests cut down, and women taken as prizes. The raiders would not spare them because they were holy. For the nuns of Coldingham, capture meant something worse than death. In their faith, to be violated was to be defiled forever, body and soul. The abbess gathered her sisters in the chapter house, the stone chamber where they prayed each morning. The sound of drums and shouting grew closer as the Viking army advanced. What happened next was an act of defiance so terrible that even the chronicles, centuries later, could barely describe it. Ebba took a knife, looked at the frightened faces around her, and said that if they could not stop the invaders, they could at least deny them victory. In front of her sisters, she cut off her nose and upper lip, disfiguring herself completely. She told the others to do the same, saying, "Make yourselves a horror to those who seek your beauty." One by one, the nuns followed her example. Their blood stained the floor, but their resolve did not break. When the Vikings finally broke through the walls and burst into the monastery, they were met not with trembling captives, but with women who had turned their own bodies into a shield of defiance. Enraged and robbed of what they came for, the raiders set fire to the buildings. Flames swept through the wooden halls, smoke billowed toward the sea, and the abbess and her nuns were trapped inside. They died not in surrender, but in resistance, a final choice between two kinds of death. Their ashes mixed with the earth of the cliff where their monastery once stood. Centuries later, their story still burns in the old chronicles, a tale of faith stronger than fear. The abbess and her sisters chose the fire, and in doing so, they denied the conquerors their victory. In the year 1011, the Viking army, under the command of Thorkel the Tall, turned its fury toward the city of Canterbury, the heart of the English Church, and one of the richest cities in the kingdom. For nearly 3 years, southern England had suffered under their raids. Villages were burned and towns were stripped of silver as King Ethelred tried to buy peace with endless payments of danageld. But peace bought with silver is never real peace. The Vikings always came back. When Thorkel's army surrounded Canterbury, the siege lasted for 20 long days. Inside the walls, priests, soldiers, and citizens held out desperately. They prayed, fought, and starved. But in the end, the city fell not by strength, but by betrayal. A man named Elfmer, once saved by Archbishop Elfhere, opened the gates to the enemy. The Vikings poured in. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes what followed. The churches were looted, the streets ran red with blood, and the city's leaders were taken alive. Among the captives were the most powerful people in Canterbury, Archbishop Elfhere himself, the abbess Leofrune of St. Mildred's, the noblewoman Elfgifu, and the Bishop of Rochester. They were too valuable to kill. Instead, they were held as hostages, their lives turned into bargaining chips. For the Vikings, each name meant silver, the only language that mattered. The abbesses and noblewomen were kept under guard, their status reduced to leverage in a brutal game of politics and greed. Archbishop Elfhere was the only one who refused to play. He would not allow the church to pay for his freedom, declaring that he would not see holy silver spent to save his life. His courage cost him dearly. Months later, at a drunken feast in Greenwich, the frustrated Vikings mocked him, pelting him with bones before one of them finally struck him down with an axe. He became a martyr, remembered for his faith and defiance. The women's fate was quieter but no less harsh. They were ransomed as part of the massive payment that followed, £48,000 of silver, the largest sum ever paid to buy peace in England. Their freedom was not given through compassion or mercy, but through calculation. Every ounce of silver weighed against their worth. When Thorkel's army finally left, Canterbury was broken, its churches in ruins, its people scattered. The noble women who returned home did so as living reminders of a kingdom humiliated and bought. Their freedom was bought not with mercy, but with silver, measured, weighed, and traded. In the year 870, another Viking army came from the sea, their sails black against the grey horizon. This time, their target was the kingdom of Strathclyde, in what is now western Scotland. At its heart stood Dumbarton Rock, a towering fortress carved from volcanic stone, rising above the River Clyde. It was called Alt Clut by the Britons who ruled there, and it was thought to be unbreakable. For 4 long months, the Vikings tried to prove otherwise. The siege was led by 2 of the most feared warlords of the age, Olaf the White, King of Dublin, and his ally, Ivar the Boneless. They surrounded the rock, cutting off every escape and every source of water. The defenders, trapped inside, endured thirst and hunger as the weeks turned into months. Chronicles say that after 120 days, the fortress well ran dry. With no hope left, the defenders finally surrendered. What happened next was one of the darkest moments in the Viking Age. The victors took everything: gold, weapons, livestock, and most of all, people. The royal family, the court, and hundreds of men, women, and children were captured. The king of Strathclyde, Arthgal, was taken prisoner along with his wife and the noblewomen of his household. Their fate was not mercy. They were shipped to Dublin, packed into longships as human cargo. That winter, the River Clyde carried a fleet of 200 Viking ships, their holds filled with captives. The annals recorded that Olaf and Ivar returned to Dublin with a great booty of people, Engles, Britons and Picts. The city became a market of misery, its streets lined with buyers and sellers, trading lives for silver. Among the prisoners were queens and commoners alike, their ranks and titles erased by chains. In Dublin, the royal captives were separated. King Arthgal was eventually killed at Olaf's order, his death recorded as a simple note in history. The women were sold or given away as rewards to warriors and traders. Some were sent across the sea to Norway, others down the river routes of Europe. Their names vanished, their lineage broken, their descendants scattered across foreign lands. The fall of Dumbarton Rock marked the end of the ancient kingdom of Strathclyde. Its royal bloodline was absorbed into the Viking world, through conquest, through slavery, through forced union. The siege was not only a military victory, but an economic harvest. The human plunder taken from that fortress helped fuel the trade networks of the north for years to come. Sieged, thirsted, shipped, the royal and the common shared the same chains. In the eyes of the conquerors, they were no longer kings and queens, only merchandise, bought and sold beneath the shadow of their own broken fortress. When people speak of Iceland's settlement, they often imagine bold explorers sailing west into the unknown, seeking freedom and a new beginning. The sagas tell stories of courage and discovery, of men escaping the rule of Norwegian kings to build their own world. But the truth, written between the lines of history, is far darker. The founding of Iceland was not only a story of adventure, it was a story of abduction. The Icelandic Book of Settlements, known as the Landnámabók, records how the island was claimed. It lists names of chieftains, warriors, and families who crossed the sea to carve out farms in the cold land of fire and ice. But buried within those proud records are quiet, haunting details. Many of these settlers did not come alone. They brought with them captives, women taken from Ireland and Scotland during raids. These women were not companions by choice. They were prizes of war. One saga tells of Ingemund the Old, a respected leader whose men raided the Irish coast before sailing to Iceland. They returned not only with treasure but with captives. Among them was an Irish noblewoman named Refgerd, forced to become the wife of a Viking named Thorstein. Another tale speaks of Ketil the Foolish, who settled in Kirkjubær. Though he was a Christian and refused to keep slaves, his neighbors did not share his beliefs. Their households were built on the labor and bodies of captured women. Modern science has uncovered what the old sagas only hinted at. DNA studies of Iceland's early population reveal that while most male settlers had Norse ancestry, nearly two-thirds of the women came from Ireland and Scotland. Their genetic legacy still lives in Icelanders today. The numbers tell a story that history once tried to hide, that the nation's mothers were, in many cases, the stolen daughters of other lands. These women built homes on foreign soil, raised children who would one day rule the valleys and fjords, and gave birth to a new people. But they did so far from the lands of their birth, torn from their families and faith. The story of Iceland's founding, often celebrated as a triumph of exploration, was also built on pain and loss. Behind every farmstead and saga hero stood a woman who had no choice. They were not pioneers. They were the price of expansion. In the summer of 1904, farmers digging into a mound near the Oslofjord in Norway uncovered something extraordinary. Beneath layers of clay lay a massive oak ship, perfectly preserved, the Oseberg ship. Its curved prow was carved into the shape of a serpent, its timbers dark and smooth from the passing of 1,000 years. When archaeologists arrived, they realized they were standing before one of the greatest Viking discoveries ever made. Inside the ship was a burial chamber, rich beyond imagination, and within it lay the remains of two women. One was old, perhaps 70 or more, her bones marked by disease and time. The other was younger, around 50, strong and healthy in life. The chamber was filled with treasures, carved sledges, woven tapestries, beds, chests, even the skeletons of 15 horses and 4 dogs. Whoever had been buried here had been honored as royalty. For decades, historians believed the older woman was a queen or high priestess, and the younger one was her servant, sacrificed to accompany her into the afterlife. But the truth, uncovered centuries later, was far more complex and far more haunting. When scientists analyzed the DNA of the younger woman, they found something unexpected. Her genetic markers did not match those of Scandinavia. Instead, they pointed thousands of miles east to the regions around the Black Sea and modern-day Iran. This woman was not born in the north. She had come, or been brought, from a faraway land. Isotope tests on her bones revealed that she had once eaten a diet poor in meat and fish. But in her final years, she lived like the elite of Norway, consuming rich foods. Her life had changed suddenly, dramatically. The evidence suggests she was taken, perhaps in a raid or through trade, and brought to Norway as a captive. There, she served a woman of immense power, living within her household until death. When her mistress died, the younger woman was buried beside her, surrounded by luxury she did not own. Whether she went willingly or by force, no one can say. But everything in that grave, the gold, the carvings, the animals, even her presence, spoke of possession, not freedom. For more than 1,000 years, the Oseberg ship lay sealed in the earth, a monument to both grandeur and cruelty. Its beauty hides the truth that one woman's glory was built on another's bondage. Her final honor was not her own, it was her master's. We remember the Vikings for their ships, their gold, and their gods. We remember their long voyages, their conquests, and the sagas written about their kings and heroes. But the true currency of their empire was human. Behind every raid, behind every burning village and hoisted banner, there was another story, quieter, darker, and almost forgotten. It was the story of the captives. For every warrior who fell in battle, a queen, a mother, or a daughter vanished into silence. They were taken from Ireland, from Scotland, from England, and from distant lands across the seas. Some were sold in Dublin's slave markets, their worth measured in silver. Some were forced into noble households, their lineage erased, but their labor and beauty turned into profit. Others were sacrificed, buried beside their masters, bound even in death. Their lives filled the space between the lines of history, unrecorded, unseen, but essential. The chronicles speak of kings and victories, yet the foundations of that power were built on human suffering. The Viking Age was not only an age of exploration, it was an age of exploitation. The women who were taken shaped the world that came after, not through choice but through endurance. Their blood flowed into the new societies of the North. Their children bore the faces and languages of 2 worlds, one remembered, one erased. Today, we find traces of them in DNA studies, in forgotten graves, in sagas that hint but never tell the full truth. The bones unearthed from cold soil, the artifacts buried with care, whisper the same story, that conquest was never only about glory. It was about control, possession, and power. The Vikings built their legacy on ships and swords, but they sustained it through people. For every longship that sailed home heavy with gold, another carried what cannot be counted, the stolen, the silenced, the lost. Their names are gone, but their blood still runs through the North. If you value this kind of documented history, make sure to subscribe. Every subscription helps us keep bringing forgotten stories like this back into the light. These are the parts of history that the old chronicles rarely mention, the hidden side of power, conquest, and survival. By supporting this channel, you help keep real history alive. Not the polished versions, but the truths buried beneath the ashes of time. We spend countless hours researching each episode, tracing the lives and voices that history tried to erase. Every view, every comment, and every share helps us continue that work. So if you want to see more deep dives into the past, stories of courage, tragedy, and truth, click that subscribe button. It costs nothing but means everything for our small team. And tell us in the comments, from which city or country are you watching this story? We read every one of your messages, and it's incredible to see how far these histories travel. Thank you for watching and for helping us uncover what the chronicles forgot.